Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale here on a kind of a disappointing week, I guess, with the baseball team. I guess that's kind of disappointing. Plus, we have no action on the basketball team, so we'll find out more about that. We're going to discuss that in Buy or Sell. And then we're going to talk to an NIL expert, Andrew Donovan, who will tell you more about later in the program. He knows his stuff, and we're going to pick his brain as to what is going on with all of this insanity with the NIL stuff. But Shane, it's another week. There has been no news on men's basketball. I guess big news. We'll talk more about that in the show. But before we get into Buy or Sell, are you discouraged like I am?
Well, with every week that goes on, you kind of wonder, and I know we're going to get on talk about the women's team. They've pretty much shored up everything going into next season and fill out their roster, it looks like, and filled it up very well with a combination of recruits out of high school and transfers. And of course, on the men's side, it's a matter of, we're not a fly on the wall. So it's hard to say, are they just striking out with some of these transfers, which I kind of doubt, or is it more they're being cautious for a number of reasons, including not knowing how many scholarships they're going to have down the road because of this IERP lingering decision. It would be nice to get some holes filled, of course. And I think we're going to talk about one of these soon. We don't know how many there are to fill. There's at least three or four, I guess, with Shane Noel leaving and possibly another one. But yeah, it would be nice to know who's coming in. They already filled one of them, but there's a lot more to do, and hopefully they'll get that done. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks. We're going to have plenty to talk about on the basketball side for sure.
Well, let's get right into it. This is Buy or Sell presented by Sell presented by Ice Shaker. See, I was trying to get that in. So
Buy or Sell presented by Ice Shaker.
Yeah. Thank you. Nice try that. Buy or Sell presented by Ice Shaker. Check out iceshaker.com. These things are great. Our buddy Chris Gronkowski, he's going to join us here in the next few weeks. We'll talk.
The USFL Defensive Player of the Week, Scooby Wright, loves his Ice Shaker, by the way.
Yes, he does. These are great. So go to iceshaker.com. You can order one of these cool Wildcat Country ones that Shane and I have been holding up, and you can get $5 off by using promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C. As if you haven't heard that before, now you hear it again. Get your ice shakers, people. Let's go. All right. Number one in Buy or Sell, Dalen Terry was among three Arizona Wildcats invited to the NBA Draft Combine in Chicago, along with obviously Ben Mathurin and Christian Koloko. Are you buying or selling my nervousness that he will remain in the draft?
So, Eric, I am a stubborn guy, and I don't like to change my opinion on things. A couple of weeks ago, I felt like it would be irresponsible if Dalen Terry didn't put his name in, at least, stick his toe in the water and see what's there. But I thought, there's almost 300 guys who've done the same thing. He's probably coming back. Yeah. At this point, Eric, I'm leaning more to him probably staying in the draft.
Really?
A couple of reasons. Number one, I've seen a couple of mock drafts, and in mock drafts, they're not worth much, but still. A couple, including one that Dalen Terry's father retweeted that had him going in the first round. It sounds like his stock is going up. And I think it's a situation where he thought, okay, probably going to be a borderline second round pick, maybe undrafted. You could definitely go, come back for a year, and you could probably definitely be a first round pick. I think he'd be more likely to stay at Arizona. At this point, it sounds like his stock is rising, and he's got a decision to make. So you consider that. I'm a little concerned. Now, I think the wild card in all of this, and we're going to talk about more about NIL in a little while, is could Arizona now, with the NIL situation, create some sort of...
You can't compete with first round
money.
money.
No, you can't. But at least could you say, hey, look, we'll get you a six-figure endorsement deal. Come back. You can work on maybe being a lottery pick. I don't think that's going to make or break the situation. I'm just saying that's a wild card thrown into these situations for the time being. So bottom line for me, am I buying that he's going to stay in the draft? Yeah. At this point, I'm leaning toward buying it, which is different from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm nervous about it, so I'm buying my nervousness of him staying in the draft. It's not great, and the fact that I saw, as you said, Shane, a mock draft where he is in the first round and Christian Koloko is not.
Yeah.
And I believe, and I don't know this for sure, but I believe that Koloko does not have eligibility to come back because he signed with an agent.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
that's
gone.
what I've heard. Right. So he's gone. So it feels like Dalen's doing this right, and that's what Koloko should have done. He didn't. I'm getting worried. I'm getting real worried about everything here.
Yeah, it's a tough, and I don't envy Dalen Terry's situation, because I understand, like, if you could be a first round pick, you want to go and do that. But then, I think back to our neighbors to the north with Lou Dort a few years ago. He got some bad advice. He got some bad advice.
He's not a bad player in the league.
I understand. My point is that it looked like he was talked about being like a borderline first or second round pick. Then he didn't get drafted at all. So I think if you're outside that top 20, you risk being not drafted at all. With that said, it sounds like, if you just look at, the guys whose stock is rising versus falling, it seems like Dalen Terry he's getting talked up all over the place. Now, maybe he's hearing something different internally. Maybe guys are saying, you know what, you play another year in college and you could be a lottery pick and maybe he'll come back. But if he thinks, I think in his mind, if he could be a first round pick, and I think that chatter has increased, I think he's more likely to stay in the draft.
Very, very concerning. And as you said, Shane, a couple of weeks ago, we're like, oh, he'll be back. He's just chilling. Yeah, not good. Number 2. Buy or sell, Shane. ASU's women's basketball's, I believe, their leading scorer, Jade LaVille. Are you buying or selling her?
Now, you may remember, Eric, or you may not, a few months ago when ASU was about to play Arizona back-to-back games. And I said, I think ASU is going to split that series. And the main reason is Jade LaVille. And your response was, who?
Who? Yeah, I don't know.
The leading scorer, who went on to score 27 points in ASU's win over Arizona in Tempe. This is a fantastic addition, not just because you're stealing from the Sun Devils, but because she is legitimately good. She was a fantastic 3-point shooter last season when Arizona needs more shooting, which is a difference from when she was at Boise State. This is her second time transferring. She was at Boise State, was not a very good 3-point shooter, went to ASU, and she was lights out from 3 last season. So she can bring that to Arizona. Adia Barnes' roster is stacked, and again, like we talked about, I'm not 100% sold on all these transfers just because we thought that they brought in some great transfers last season and they didn't make that much of a difference. But I think you combine the transfers they're bringing in, and I think Jade is the best of them, along with some of these really top recruits coming out of high school. And you've got at least a top 20 program, maybe a top 10 next season. Sam Thomas's departure does concern me for multiple reasons, but overall, you got to love Arizona's chances to make the tournament, maybe make another deep run next season.
I mean, Adia is a star in terms of recruit. I mean, she's unbelievable.
Yep.
What she's been able to do from literally a nothing program when she took over. They're terrible. And now, she's stealing her biggest rival's best player.
Yeah, amazing.
Which is amazing. So you have to buy.
Imagine if Kate Reese went to ASU. That's kind of the equivalent right there.
It would be nauseating.
Yeah.
So you're buying on Jade LaVille, which is great.
Absolutely.
But number 3, are you buying or selling the notion that players in all sports should not be able to transfer to a rival or in-state school?
Well, you know what? I always have the disadvantage of answering these questions first, but I'm gonna send this one back to you because I'm genuinely curious as to why you would even suggest that they shouldn't be able to.
Yeah, they absolutely should not be able to. So I'm obviously buying this.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just something about a rivalry. If you go to Michigan, you should not play at Ohio State. Now, there are guys that have done that. It's one thing when you see a guy, Scooby Wright mentioned the other week, Vince Amy was his defensive coach, one of the coaches that he played for. Vince Amy was an ASU former defensive lineman. Okay, that's one thing. It's postgraduate, everything. But when you shouldn't be able to play on one side of a rivalry and then the other. I think that if your team is scheduled in whatever sport to play another team that following season, you should not be able to you should not be allowed to transfer there.
Well, beyond the fact that, first of all, I just blatantly disagree with you. And it's not just
all
because Arizona just landed a great recruit from or a transfer from ASU.
Right.
But how would you enforce that if you're the NCAA? Would you designate rival teams? And by the way, some schools have more rivals than others. Like Michigan, for example, has Ohio State and Michigan State. A lot of schools, in fact, probably most, have more than one rival, whereas Arizona and ASU were kind of unique in that regard. They're sort of on an island.
But didn't there used to be a rule in college athletics, as of even a few years ago, that if you transferred within the conference, you had to sit out 2 years, I believe it was, and now you can do it immediately? Like, if you want to sit out a year, I could maybe get on board with this, but to go from ASU to U of A, while it benefits us, I just don't like it. It sets a really bad precedent.
I have mixed feelings about being able to play right away when you transfer.
Yes.
I mean, it's one thing if your coach leaves, which in ASU's case, that's what happened.
They did. Right. I understand.
Charlie Turner Thorne retired. That's one thing. But I'm not big on you could just go play somewhere else right away if nothing's really changed at your school, including the head coach. That I would kind of be okay with reinforcing that you have to sit out a year unless you're a grad transfer, and I have no problem with playing right away in that regard. But as what you're talking about specifically, transferring in state in the conference and I have no problem with that whatsoever. Now look, my wife, who's not a sports fan, would disagree with me because she says there's no loyalty in sports anymore.
That's right. She's right.
Players go from one team, especially in the pro level, they go from one team to the next, and even including in season. So, but I just don't like the idea of restricting where student athletes want to go, especially because it may be a good fit. Maybe the best possible fit for you happens to be that rival school. You're not necessarily trying to stick it to your former team. And I don't think that's what happened in this case necessarily.
There's a lot I don't like about this. I'm happy that U of A got her. Don't get me wrong, but I hate this. I mean, can you imagine if we're sitting here talking about, Daniel Susak's like, no, I'm going to go play for ASU next year. He shouldn't be allowed to do that.
Why not?
In state, it's your rival. You shouldn't do that. There should be morally wrong. It should be technically wrong. I mean, I hope.
Well, complain about it morally all you want. I don't think NCAA should be in the business of restricting that kind of thing. Just my opinion.
Okay. Speaking of Daniel Susak, number 4, after losing a series to a dreadful USC team on the road this weekend, is it fair to say that Arizona baseball is in big trouble as far as making the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, going back to my stubbornness of not wanting to give in and say, yeah, maybe you're right. You're right, Eric, to sound the alarm on this team a few weeks ago. I thought, they lost 3 out of 4 games, a couple losses to bad teams, but it's been a trend. It's been a trend for about a good month now. They lost last week to Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is legitimately good.
Yeah, they're really good.
They were top 25 for the first time ever. There are RPIs in the top 20. So that's fine. But USC losing to 2 out of 3 at USC, which has an RPI right around 100, is not good. At this point, I think Arizona is probably on the outside looking in for the regionals, which when you consider, I know there was some turnover, but the roster that Chip Hale inherited and where this team was at a month and a half ago, they were, a third of the way into the season, maybe a little bit more. They were in the top 5, top 10 in RPI. It's been a big drop off. And I don't necessarily think that says anything about Chip Hale or anything. I think it's too early to say, but it's definitely disappointing when you consider this team was ranked in the top 25. We're looking at possibly hosting a regional, maybe even a super regional. That's all out the window. And now we may be looking at a situation where they have to win that new Pac-12 tournament just for them to get into the postseason.
All right. This is a bonus buy or sell question. And I don't like to play, what if game, but
yes, you do.
Okay. Yeah, I do. If Jay Johnson had stayed and Jacob Berry had stayed, do you believe that Arizona would be in the top 10 right now? Yes or no?
Just those two guys?
Just those two guys.
Just those two? No, I don't think so. I think that's a bridge too far. Top 25, yes. Top 25, yeah. Well, I know that's why you asked, but top 10, yeah. Top 25. But with that said, again, Chip Hale needs time to rebuild the team. He got some good pieces back. So I think that if anyone's saying, this Chip Hale experiment is a failure, people are going down that road like they're doing with Caitlin Lowe, way too early for that. If by year 3 they're not in the top 25, then they have a problem. Well,
I mean, they cracked the top 25 earlier this year. They're 33-17, and now they play Oregon State this weekend at home. And Oregon State happens to be number 2 in the country. Now, opportunity.
If
you win the series, that's right. Now we're talking. If you lose the series or get swept, I think a sweep and they're out. I think 1-2 against Oregon State, and they're still in the bubble.
And it's going to be hot. It's going to be in about 100 some odd degrees this weekend. So maybe that'll, the same way that Oregon State uses that cold, rainy weather in football late in the year. Maybe that's in Arizona's favor in baseball. Who knows?
I'm concerned. Okay. Number 5. This is asinine. I don't really know any other suitable term to describe it, Shane. So, and these are not official odds on a U.S. legal sports book. So we'll see what those look like in the coming weeks. I found out that they're going to be released maybe within the next week or so on some of the local sports books. Okay. With that said, the Pac-12 odds are out on this offshore book. Oregon is a little over 2-1. USC is right behind him. Utah is almost 4-1, which seems like pretty good value there. ASU is fourth at 9-1 to win the conference. Okay.
Are they really? I haven't seen that.
So ASU is tied, according to these, at 9-1 with UCLA.
Wow.
Washington is 12-1. Then we have a step back. Washington State 33-1. Oregon State 40-1. Cal 66-1. Stanford 80-1. And I still haven't mentioned Arizona.
No.
Colorado is 150-1. Arizona, according to these, Shane, is 400-1 to win the conference. ASU is 9-1. Does somebody not know something here? Are you buying these rankings or selling them?
I'll sell them. I mean, look, Arizona's not going to win the Pac-12, but I feel like this year's territorial cup game is likely to be a coin flip, especially because it's in Tucson. So the idea that the odds are that there's that big a gap.
391 differences, Shane.
Yeah. I would certainly sell ASU's odds a little bit more than Arizona's. I think 400-1 is a little extreme considering who Arizona's bringing in. Yeah. I'd maybe cut that in half.
No, it shouldn't be that.
Well, that's fine. But ASU 9-1. Look, they've added some decent transfers. They really have. I mean, I don't think they're going to be as bad as some people think. They got the quarterback from Florida who's
Emory Jones. He's all right. Yeah,
he's all right. But 9-1, I think, is a little high. But maybe Vegas knows something we don't. Maybe
this is not Vegas. This is offshore. So we're going to find out. Yeah, Vegas is not throwing a 400-1 number on Arizona. I can promise you.
We'll see.
That.
Yeah, let me see what Vegas says.
We'll get to this in the coming weeks when the Vegas odds are out. But 9-1 on ASU and 400-1 on Arizona.
That gap is way too big. I
think the Wildcats are arguably a better team this year.
I would say last season that would be about right. This coming season, I mean, and we haven't played any games yet. And Arizona's got some, they got some great recruits, some great transfers. They haven't played a game, so we don't know how good they'll be. But those sound like odds from last year. Put it that way. I think ASU might actually have been a little bit better last year.
They were,
and Arizona probably would be about the same. But this year, I would cut those odds at least in half for Arizona.
That is somebody that has not done their homework. That's great. So if you, not that I want to encourage signing up for an offshore account, but I mean, I would actually think about it with this stupidity and take your $5 and put
$5 to win 2,000, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would it be? Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that what it is?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way there's no way the American books are going to offer that. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. All right. Bonus question, Shane. There was I've mentioned this guy to you before, this Big Game Boomer on Twitter. I like these lists that he
just makes up stuff.
So he lists the top 75 traditions in college football last week. And number 42 is the bear down chant. I put this on Twitter, but I'm not familiar with the chant of bear down. Buy or sell the bear down chant at 42, Shane.
Well, first of all, I'm appalled that the Zone of Sway did not make the top.
That's what I said on Twitter, right? That's what I said.
How dare you, sir? Mm-hmm. Assuming you're a sir.
Or the banging that drum thing or whatever that is.
Bang drum or the country song between the third and fourth quarters.
That's gone, I hear that's gone.
No, that's too bad. Mm-hmm. The bear down chant. No, I don't like the bear down fight song.
The chant. No,
the chant.
Yeah.
What's the chant?
So number one so I'll give you the top 5 on this. One is the Kinnick wave at Iowa, where they wave to the hospital. That's great.
Yep.
Ralphie's run at Colorado is 2. The toilet papering Toomer's corner at Auburn is 3. Okay. The introduction of Enter Sandman at Virginia Tech is 4. And the whiteout at Penn State is 5. Okay. Other ones like jump around at Wisconsin 7. That's cool.
Yeah.
The bear down chant, Shane. I mean,
not familiar.
I don't know so dotting of the I, Ohio State, that's 38. Now that would be one of my top 5.
This is not a scientific poll. This is just one random faceless dude on Twitter making up stuff so we could talk about it and get all bent out of shape, which we're doing for this person.
With that said, earlier this week, Shane, he had something about uniforms. And he said that this guy said that Arizona's home uniforms are way better than ASU's. So in terms of style. So, okay, if there's something.
Well, our friend Heath Bray would always, refers to the mustard and rust.
Yeah. So just wanted to throw that out there. The bear down chant. I'll let you stir on that one. And let's go talk to Andrew Donovan. He's going to tell us about NIL goods, bads, and uglies, I guess, here on Wildcat Country. Scooby, we sent you an ice shaker. They are a sponsor courtesy of our buddy Chris Gronkowski. You have it right there.
I love my ice shaker. Fun fact, when I trained with Glenn Gronkowski, everybody, when we were trained together, people thought I was the other Gronk brother, so it was kind of funny. But yes, I love my ice shaker. It is very good. I use it every day. I am a veteran to the ice shaker game, by the way.
What's up, Wildcat Country? Chris Gronkowski here. Use coupon code Wildcat Country at iceshaker.com.
Shane, last week we talked a little bit about NIL and the craziness going on in the NCAA. Now we have an expert on with us to talk about it. Andrew Donovan, who's the VP of Collegiate Partnerships for Altius Sports Partners, and previously was the Director of Compliance at, I believe, if that's similar title at the University of Tennessee. So, Andrew, thank you for joining us. Rocky Top, of course, big SEC school, so you know a lot about what's going on, football, basketball, especially. Let's talk about the news that broke early this week from the NCAA. Of course, they decide to stick their neck out and create regulations for NIL. What does this all mean, in your opinion?
Well, first and foremost, Eric, Shane, I appreciate you guys having me. It's good to spend a little bit of time with you. What it means is you could rewind 10 months ago and the same rules were in place. That is actually the reality of what was released earlier this week. It's simply a reinforcement of rules that have, quite frankly, been on the books for decades. You had NIL come along July 1, 21, permit new opportunities for athletes. To no one's surprise, that leaked its way into the recruiting space. And so what was announced earlier this week is really the NCAA and administrators on campus, presidents, chancellors, athletics directors' attempt to reel in a bit what's going on relative to NIL as it relates to prospective student athletes. And that would obviously include transfer athletes. So there's nothing new per se from a legislative standpoint. It's really more of a, shining a neon sign that says, look, if you are a collective and you're engaging with prospects, you are qualifying as a booster. And the rules regarding boosters interacting with prospects have been on the books for decades. And so we're now going to scrutinize more closely. We're going to enforce our rules more closely as it relates to booster engagement with prospects.
And like Eric said, Andrew, thanks a lot for joining us. This is not an Arizona specific interview, but I feel like it's a very important one. And we'll ask some Arizona questions along the way. So what do you expect to change, if anything, going forward now with this announcement from the NCAA? Are they really going to scrutinize more closely, or is it just just remember what the rules are? How do you see that?
It's really tough to say. I don't think you go through the exercise of putting out guidance like this and taking the time of some really important folks across campuses to come up with this guidance if you're not going to be serious about it. So I do anticipate the NCAA's enforcement staff is going to have the shackles taken off, so to speak, where they're going to now be able to go out and investigate and potentially, charge on cases where they can show a clear inducement in the recruiting process in the form of NIL when you have boosters engaging with prospects. The challenge here and the interesting piece of all of this is there's still some legal layers here that remain to be seen. I'm sure there are some plaintiffs' attorneys out there that were licking their chops when they read that guidance come out, because they look at it and say, who are you, NCAA, to say that X individual can't do business with Y individual? X individual being a business owner who may qualify as a booster, Y individual being somebody who just so happens to be a prospective student athlete. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how it does all play out. I do think you will have institutions being a bit more buttoned up relative to their education and communication with their boosters who may be involved in this space, so as to avoid issues that may rise down the road.
Yeah, with my limited understanding, and admittedly it is very limited, I feel like any new rule that the NCAA might put in place, it's going to be challenged in court in some capacity, because you had the court ruling that opened this wild west world we live in now as it is. Do you see more court challenges coming down the line here pretty soon?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, I think the reason we are where we are right now with this recent guidance is because the NCAA was operating with both hands tied behind their back because of what came out at the end of June through the Supreme Court in Alston. People conflate the issues. The Alston case had absolutely nothing to do with NIL. It had to do with the value of educational benefits that athletes could be provided. And it was deemed to be an antitrust violation to cap the value of those opportunities for athletes. And so the NCAA kind of threw their hands up and said, we're sick of getting sued. We're going to give you some pretty plain Jane guidance as it relates to NIL. If you got a state law, follow it. If you don't, make sure you follow NCAA rules. And they kind of backed off. And now we are where we are. And so they're trying to get more involved. I think the NCAA and I think the decision makers around college sports understand that this is a very litigious environment, and that's going to continue. Those rules are going to continue to get challenged. But they feel like, hey, this is an opportunity to slow things down a bit, at least as it relates to recruiting. And so we'll give it a shot. And it's inevitable that this will be challenged in court before too long.
When you see a case like what happened with Miami's Isaiah Wong, who said, yeah, I signed an NIL deal and then I outperformed it, so I want more money. As a former compliance director, how sick would that have made you if you had seen one of your athletes do just that?
It's a tough situation, because if you're an 18 to 22-year-old in this environment and you're reading headlines across the country about opportunities that your fellow athletes are getting, you can't blame some of these guys and gals for saying, I want to get mine. Right. And so it's a very difficult situation, particularly because you have a lot of adults who have interjected themselves into this space, really, to be frank, in a way that it was not intended to be applied. Right. The right of publicity that is granted on a state by state level has existed for a long, long time. For you and I and anyone else who's listening to this, we could go out and market ourselves through what we're now calling name, image, likeness at the college level. This is new to these 18 to 22-year-olds, and they want to get theirs. And so I guess to answer your question directly, I wouldn't have felt great about it. Right. I would want to make sure that I'm having a conversation with that individual, but it's not surprising given the space we find ourselves in right now, 10 months into this new era.
Do you see there being eventually a salary cap of sorts for colleges, just to kind of keep things on a more equal level? So in Oklahoma isn't paying every player on the roster $50,000, even if you're a guy that's never going to step foot in a game. I mean, there's got to be something done that levels things out a bit, right?
I think NIL is the tip of the iceberg. We talked about litigation and where that may go. There's also simultaneous legislation going on at both the state and in some ways federal level. The National Labor Relations Board right now is reviewing basically a case that's contesting the status of athletes to be employees of their institutions. I think all of these things are rolling downhill and they're picking up steam. So your question about, is there going to be a salary cap? I think you're going to find college athletics is going to look very different 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now. And whether that is full employment status for athletes, I don't know for certain. But I really think we're going down a route here where you are going to have institutions wanting to take more control of this NIL space in particular, which is then going to bleed itself into what are the rights of these athletes. And if they're employees or they're quasi-employees, that might mean they have the right to unionize depending on what state they live in. And if they go to a private or public institution, they then can collectively bargain. Are we sharing media revenues at that point in time? And so if all of that comes into play, which quite frankly, I don't see how we don't get to that point, you're going to have things that look, I would say, a little bit more competitively equal as it relates to benefits for athletes, if you're going to compete under the same framework. And make no mistake, if we go down that road that I just described, the Division I that we all know now, the 350 plus Division I playing basketball schools, there's not going to be 350 Division I schools. It's going to look very, very different.
We asked a recruiting expert this question, Andrew, a week or two ago. So I'd like to ask you, just because you have a different perspective. Well, say we continue down this path for a while with the way we're going. I know things, like you said, things are probably going to look different in a year or so, but do you feel like this new world we live in is a situation where the rich are going to get richer, or where there's an opportunity for like a football program like Arizona, which is not a national, perennial top 25 team program, to become more competitive by enhancing the NIL opportunities?
That's a great question. I think anytime you have this dramatic of a change in the landscape of how these schools, these programs, these athletes and coaches are operating, it creates opportunity. There are obviously going to be built-in recruiting advantages at some of these programs that have experienced a high level of success for many years. I mean, that's the reality, right? Athletes want to go to a place where they can excel at a high level, prepare themselves for potentially the next level while they're getting their degree. But I do think the more this stuff changes, the more opportunity it presents for schools that are really thinking about what's next, right? And we at Altius, we talk a lot about trying to help our clients stay ahead of the moving puck, because I just mentioned NIL is the tip of the iceberg. So we're not going to sit there and pretend we have all of the answers for if the athlete is deemed an employee, this is exactly what you do, right? We're not Microsoft Office off the shelf. That's not how this works. It's different for different schools depending on what their philosophies and priorities are. However, I think the schools that are thinking seriously about what is next and having very detailed and open discussions about how they may approach certain issues that may be coming are going to position themselves to be more successful. So somewhat of a long-winded way of saying, I do think there are some built-in advantages that are going to allow some of those successful programs to continue on that trajectory. But I think that we are ripe for opportunity for schools that we haven't heard a lot about in certain sports taking advantage of this new time.
My last question for you, put yourself in the shoes of an assistant football or basketball coach that's always on the recruiting trail. And they have to go out and they're talking to like for Arizona, like getting into some 4-star athletes is a big deal. And Arizona's had a lot of success with that just in 1 year under Jed Fish. But today they go out and they're trying to convince a 4-star athlete to come play for Arizona. And obviously they mentioned, okay, you get a great education, you get a chance to go to the next level. We've got a ton of NFL experience on our coaching staff. That's all worked for them well. Do they have to incorporate, well, we got some great NIL opportunities for you too. Like, is that, do you know, or do you suspect that's come like part of the standard pitch already?
It better be. And when we talk, I mean, we're working with nearly 30 schools, majority of which, large majority, almost all are Power 5 institutions. And, you know, whenever we meet with coaches, particularly as of late, we say, tell us about how this is coming up in the recruiting process. And 9 times out of 10, it's like, oh, it's coming up a lot. The times it's not, it's sort of like, who are you recruiting? Who are you talking to? Because these athletes are seeing this everywhere. And so really, I think it's important not only that these coaches can talk intellectually about what is NIL, what does it mean for your son or daughter, because the parents are going to want to know, and for the prospect themselves, but really understanding in your community, in your state, surrounding your campus, based on the brand of the program you're at, what type of opportunities may follow. And when you think about Arizona and you think about Tucson, there's not a whole lot of professional sports competition. When you think about that ecosystem, that community that is Tucson, and you think about the brand of Arizona, and that carries a lot of weight. There's a lot of supporters. There's a lot of businesses surrounding Tucson that want to support the program, provide opportunities for athletes. So if the coaches aren't talking about that, they should.
So real quick, Eric, I just want to follow up with that. So coaches really, they need to be prepared. Like they need to get an education on what the NIL opportunities are at their university and just the overall NIL landscape and what it means, and come prepared to be educated on that when they meet with every individual student athlete.
Absolutely. They at least should have a talk track relative to what is the philosophy, not only of our institution relative to NIL, but of our program, right? And their current athletes should know what their philosophy is too, because I can tell you this from spending a dozen years on campus, your best or worst recruiters are your current athletes. And these prospects are going to come on campus and they're going to have this downtime in the dorm room playing video games. And they're going to say to the current guys or gals, hey, what's coach really like? What's the program really like? How do they feel about NIL? And if the athlete is saying anything other than, man, coach is all about it, they support us, there's a lot of opportunities, then they got a problem. So right. I will say, though, taking you back to the prior question about where this is all going from employment rights and salary caps, it is the same principle. If the coaches and the administration don't have a pretty good understanding of the landscape and aren't able to articulate, at least with some level of understanding, all of this change, all of these confusing dynamics, they're going to fall behind. And so it's becoming really, really important to understand the space better.
Andrew, I want to ask you one last question. It's been great. I mean, it feels, as I've told Shane for other interviews before, it feels like we've been in class for the last really 15, 20 minutes. So really appreciate it. I want to ask you something just in general. It seems like in your career, been mostly out in the eastern half of the United States. What do you know about the Pac-12 and their disadvantages as far as TV contract, for example, the games being on so late? Just what's your perception of the conference in general?
That's a great question. In some ways, I feel like I'm speaking out of turn a little bit, just not having a lot of direct experience in that space. But what I would tell you, spending 9 of my 12 years on campus between LSU and Tennessee in the SEC, some of the perspective, I think, is that the philosophy and the priorities of Pac-12 institutions are a little bit different than some of those other Power 5 conferences. And the focus being on the degree, right? And of getting your education and setting up for what's next in your life. Now, that's not to say that that's not the case at other institutions, be it SEC or elsewhere. But it just seems like there's a little bit of a different priority held at these Pac-12 institutions, particularly when you get to the top at that chancellor president level. You think about TV contracts, a lot of that is a byproduct of timing and the timing of when you negotiate that deal and what networks were involved. And I think the Pac-12 in some ways probably had some bad luck in the timing of when they did their deals and when renewals came up. But at the same time, it's not going to help you when you're playing in some of the windows you're playing. When you're playing at 10 p.m., and you say Pac-12 After Dark, which is awesome. I watch it myself regularly. My wife could tell you. But you're inevitably going to have people that are burned out from watching it all day and are going to hit the pillow and you're going to lose viewership, which in turn is going to hurt you at your next round of renewal. So that's a tough one. There are people much smarter and with much more expertise than me that I think can dive in, roll up their sleeves and figure that out a little bit better.
Well, I can tell you that Larry Scott, former Pac-12 commissioner, was not one of them. I would have much rather have had your expertise than his, because he did not do the conference any favors. Andrew, thank you so much for explaining things to Shane and I. Great stuff, and I'm sure we'd love to have you on going forward, just as this landscape continues to evolve.
I appreciate it, guys. Really enjoyed it. Be happy to join you anytime.
I feel like I just got out of class after talking to Andrew. I mean, that was really good stuff, Shane. We learned a lot from him. He's a really good expert.
Well, and it's such a fluid situation, like he said. I mean, in 2 to 3 months, this whole thing could be wildly different. In 6 months and a year, things have gotten out of control. And the NCAA's finally said, okay, maybe we shouldn't have just thrown caution to the wind and put everyone on the honor system. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but fascinated to see what happens, and fascinated to see also what kind of punishment Arizona men's basketball will get, even though what they did was wrong back then, but a lot of that's legal now.
Right.
Is that going to make any impact on the decision? Probably not, but you never know. You never know.
They may be more lenient than they would have been, let's say, 3 years ago. Yeah. So maybe this dragging out. Arizona missed the postseason once. I would be shocked if they got another postseason ban.
I don't think they will. I think they will get some scholarship reductions and a lot lengthy probation, but yeah, I don't think they're going to get another postseason ban.
All right, we didn't talk softball this week. Softball, I think, was like 42 in RPI. Probably going to make the tournament, but we'll find out. But I want to ask about baseball, Shane. A couple of quick predictions. Men's baseball, or not that, baseball against Oregon State. Obviously, baseball, women's softball, men's baseball.
Yes.
So baseball against Oregon State. Will they win the series, lose the series, or get swept?
I think they'll take one. I'm not bold enough to say they're going to win the series, but I think they'll take one.
I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win the series. I think they're going to win two.
They win the series. They're back on the right side of the bubble, assuming that they're on the wrong side now. I think they get back on the right side if they do. 1 out of 3, though, would keep them afloat.
I saw that men's tennis bowed out last week. Nice run. It was cool to have. I didn't get a chance to speak with them, but Shane did. Clancy Shields on the other week. So congratulations to them on all their success. But Shane, is there going to be, do you predict that between now and next week's show, whenever we record it, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that, there will be any significant happenings with a men's basketball team? Because that's pretty much all that we care about right now.
Yeah, there'll probably be something. I don't know when's the deadline for Dalen Terry to make his final decision? Do you know?
I think it's June, sometime in June.
So you got a little bit of time. There's probably going to be something, even if it's a top transfer having Arizona in it is Final 5. I think there will be something else to talk about. And knock on wood, we're going to have a basketball recruiting expert on with us next week to chat about it as well.
And we definitely need one. I'm going to sell that, Shane. I'm going to say another week goes by and we learn.
You're just going to get more and more apprehensive.
Yep, I really am. I'm having people texting me now, like, what are we doing here? Come on, Tommy. Just get somebody. Just bring us.
I'm still hoping he's got someone in mind who he's just waiting to pounce. I don't know.
But Shane, when you see what Adia's doing, where she has filled out this roster with a couple of transfers, and Tommy's sitting on his hands here, it's a little frustrating.
It's definitely a tenuous situation. I still have faith he's going to come through and bring in a couple of decent guys, but we'll see. I think we'll have more to talk about next week.
Well, I want to thank our guest, Andrew, for coming on earlier. Shane, another great show. We will hopefully talk a little men's basketball recruiting next week, and much to come in the coming weeks, including some football reminiscing, which is one of my favorite parts about doing the show. So for Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. As always, thanks for listening, and bear down.